In the shadow of global conflict, a giant nation hesitated, watching, waiting, caught between isolation and the storm gathering on the horizon. Before the United States plunged into the chaos of World War II, the world was already burning. In the early 1930s and 1940s, Japan was aggressively expanding its empire across Asia. Driven by ambitions for resources, power, and dominance, Japan had already invaded Manchuria in 1931, shocking the international community. Its ambitions did not stop there. By 1937, the brutal Second Sino-Japanese War had erupted, dragging China into years of devastating conflict. This expansion alarmed the United States, which had long viewed the Pacific as within its sphere of influence. Yet despite growing concerns, America remained officially neutral, locked in an isolationist mindset shaped by the scars of World War I and the Great Depression. The American public and Congress were wary of becoming entangled in another distant war, determined to focus on rebuilding their own nation. However, President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood the danger lurking in the Pacific and beyond. Though he faced strong political resistance, he quietly began preparing the country for the possibility of war. His leadership reflected a careful balance, publicly maintaining neutrality while secretly strengthening America's military and supporting allied nations through programs like the Lend-Lease Act, which supplied Britain, France, and other countries with vital war materials. Meanwhile, Japan's relentless push southward heightened tensions. The empire sought to secure vital resources like oil, rubber, and metals, which were scarce in its own territory. The rich Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, and other Southeast Asian colonies became prime targets. In response, the United States imposed economic sanctions and embargoes, especially cutting off oil exports to Japan, a move that threatened to cripple the Japanese war machine. As the diplomatic stalemate deepened, both sides prepared for inevitable conflict. Japan, facing resource shortages and unwilling to back down, began plotting a bold and devastating strike designed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and buy time to consolidate its empire. The attack came without warning on the morning of December 7, 1941. Japanese aircraft launched a surprise assault on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the main base of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Explosions rocked the harbor as battleships, destroyers, and aircraft were destroyed or damaged. The human toll was staggering, over 2,400 Americans killed and many more wounded. For the American people, the attack was a shocking betrayal, a brutal end to the illusion of safety. President Roosevelt famously declared December 7 a date which will live in infamy, and called on Congress to declare war on Japan. With overwhelming support, America officially entered World War II. This moment marked a seismic shift in global history. The United States was no longer an observer but a central actor in a worldwide struggle between democracy and totalitarianism. Roosevelt's vision and determination steered the nation into this new role, setting the stage for America's transformation into a global superpower. Yet, the road ahead was daunting. The war in the Pacific would demand extraordinary sacrifices, brutal battles across remote islands, and a clash of wills between two powerful and determined nations. As the world watched, America prepared to take its place on the front lines of history. Mobilizing a nation, America's transformation into a war machine. The bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, shattered more than just ships and planes. It shattered America's long-held policy of isolation. Suddenly, the nation was thrust into a global war unlike anything it had ever known. But the United States was not prepared to fight a world war at the drop of a hat. It faced enormous challenges, transforming a peacetime economy into a war-producing powerhouse, training millions of soldiers, and coordinating efforts across land, sea, and air. Within days of the attack, the American government swung into high gear. Factories that had produced cars, appliances, and consumer goods were swiftly repurposed to build tanks, aircraft, ships, and ammunition. The entire industrial landscape of the country was remodeled to serve one goal: victory. This shift was unprecedented in scale and speed. In 1940, U.S. military spending had been a fraction of what it would become just a few years later. Women entered the workforce in record numbers, filling jobs traditionally held by men who were now soldiers overseas. The iconic figure of Rosie the Riveter emerged as a symbol of female strength and resilience. Factories buzzed with activity around the clock, producing a staggering volume of war materials that overwhelmed Axis powers by sheer quantity and quality. Meanwhile, the military expanded rapidly. The U.S. Army grew from roughly 200,000 men to over 8 million by 1945. The Navy transformed as well, with aircraft carriers replacing battleships as the dominant force at sea, a shift highlighted by the crucial victories in the Pacific. Marines trained rigorously for amphibious assaults, mastering new techniques essential for island warfare. President Roosevelt's leadership was central in maintaining national morale and managing the war effort. His fireside chats kept Americans informed and motivated, emphasizing unity, sacrifice, and determination. The government also launched propaganda campaigns encouraging rationing, buying war bonds, and supporting the troops. As production ramped up, so did innovation. New technologies like radar, sonar, and proximity fuses enhanced the effectiveness of weapons and detection systems. Aircraft design advanced rapidly, producing faster and more reliable planes such as the F-6F Hellcat and B-29 Superfortress. Intelligence operations improved too, with codebreakers making breakthroughs that would prove crucial in upcoming battles. Across the Pacific, the early months of 1942 were marked by a series of desperate battles. The Japanese offensive was swift and brutal, capturing territories from the Philippines to Singapore and threatening Australia. Yet, the tide began to turn with the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, the first naval battle fought entirely by aircraft from carriers, which stopped Japan's advance toward Australia. Then came the pivotal Battle of Midway in June 1942. Using decrypted Japanese communications, American commanders anticipated and ambushed the Japanese fleet. The U.S. Navy destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, crippling Japan's offensive capabilities and shifting naval superiority to the Allies. This victory was a major psychological boost for America and a strategic turning point. With naval power on the rise, the U.S. developed its island-hopping strategy. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, American forces targeted key positions to build airfields and naval bases, isolating and bypassing others. This approach saved time and resources while steadily pushing Japan back across the Pacific. Training and logistics were critical to this effort. The U.S. military established vast bases across the Pacific and built new supply routes. Troops faced not only enemy fire but also harsh environments, sweltering jungles, treacherous reefs, and tropical diseases. Adaptability and resilience became key traits of the American fighting forces. Back home, the war effort reshaped society. African Americans, Native Americans, and other minorities contributed significantly, both in combat roles and on the home front, despite facing discrimination and segregation. The Double V campaign, victory abroad and victory against racism at home, highlighted the contradictions in American democracy that the war exposed. In politics, Roosevelt balanced managing wartime alliances, especially with Britain and the Soviet Union, while preparing the country for a long conflict. He coordinated major conferences with Allied leaders to plan not only military strategy but also the post-war world order. By late 1943, America was no longer a hesitant participant but a confident leader in the Allied coalition. The industrial and military machine was running at full throttle, capable of sustaining prolonged global warfare. The sacrifices and transformations of these years laid the groundwork for the intense battles and final push that would follow. Island hopping and the crucible of war, the fierce battles in the Pacific. The vast Pacific Ocean became the stage for some of the most intense and grueling battles of World War II. After gaining naval supremacy following Midway, the United States launched a bold campaign designed to push the Japanese back step by step, an approach known as island hopping. Rather than assaulting every enemy-held island, American strategists selected critical islands to capture, which would serve as forward bases for air and naval operations, gradually tightening the noose around Japan's empire. The island-hopping campaign was not only a military strategy, it was a test of endurance, ingenuity, and sheer willpower. The terrain of the Pacific Islands was brutal: dense jungles, volcanic landscapes, coral reefs, and extreme tropical weather created nightmarish conditions for soldiers. The Japanese defenders, aware of their precarious situation, fought with fanatical determination, often choosing death over surrender. One of the earliest and bloodiest battles was Guadalcanal, which began in August 1942. It marked the first major offensive by Allied forces against the Japanese and set the tone for the fierce combat to come. American Marines landed on the island, facing entrenched Japanese troops, disease, and supply shortages. Control of Guadalcanal was crucial because it threatened Japanese supply routes between their empire's territories and gave the Allies a base to launch further attacks. Fighting on Guadalcanal was characterized by brutal jungle warfare, night battles, and a desperate struggle for air and sea control. The battle dragged on for months, with both sides suffering heavy casualties, but ultimately the Allies prevailed. Guadalcanal's victory boosted Allied morale and halted Japanese expansion in the South Pacific. Following Guadalcanal, the United States continued its advance through the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. Each battle involved amphibious assaults against well-fortified Japanese positions, forcing troops to overcome deadly machine gun nests, sniper fire, and booby traps. Tarawa Atoll in the Gilberts became infamous for the high casualty rate and the challenges of landing troops on heavily defended beaches. As the campaign progressed, the U.S. military refined its tactics and improved coordination between infantry, artillery, air support, and naval bombardments. Innovations like specialized landing crafts, LVTs, helped soldiers cross coral reefs and reach enemy positions more effectively. By mid-1944, the capture of Saipan in the Mariana Islands marked a turning point. From Saipan, the U.S. could launch long-range B-29 bombing raids directly on the Japanese mainland, bringing the war into Japan's backyard. The battle for Saipan was fierce, with Japanese civilians caught in the crossfire and many committing suicide rather than surrendering. Iwo Jima, one of the smallest but most strategically vital islands, became the site of one of the bloodiest battles in early 1945. The island's volcanic terrain and fortified caves made it a nightmare for the invading Marines. The iconic image of the American flag raising atop Mount Suribachi captured the spirit and sacrifice of the campaign. Following Iwo Jima, Okinawa presented an even greater challenge. The largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater, Okinawa was seen as the last stepping stone before an invasion of Japan itself. The battle lasted over 2 months, with kamikaze attacks on Allied ships becoming more frequent and deadly. The casualties were staggering: over 12,000 Americans and up to 100,000 Japanese soldiers, along with tens of thousands of civilians. Throughout these battles, intelligence played a crucial role. American codebreakers cracked Japanese communications, enabling preemptive strikes and better strategic planning. Technological advancements like radar and improved air support further tilted the balance in favor of the Allies. The island-hopping campaign, while costly, successfully isolated Japanese strongholds and broke their defensive perimeter. However, it came at a heavy human cost. The fierce fighting, combined with the harsh environment, tested the limits of American troops. Yet, these victories paved the way for the final phase of the war, the direct assault on Japan's home islands. The campaign also had a profound impact on the soldiers and society back home. Letters from the front lines spoke of exhaustion and loss, but also of camaraderie and resolve. The war fostered innovations in medicine, logistics, and military tactics that would shape future conflicts. As 1945 dawned, the United States stood ready for the ultimate confrontation. The island-hopping campaign had brought them to Japan's doorstep, but victory was still uncertain. The horrors of battles like Okinawa made clear the terrible price that an invasion of the Japanese mainland would demand. In this crucible of fire, the courage and sacrifice of those who fought would shape the course of history and prepare the world for the next chapter in a war that was about to reach its devastating climax. The final blow, Roosevelt's leadership, the atomic age, and Japan's surrender. As World War II entered its final phase, the pressure on the Allied forces mounted relentlessly. The Pacific War had been fought across countless islands, each battle more grueling than the last. The American military, bolstered by vast industrial might and relentless determination, was closing in on Japan itself. But victory demanded not just strength on the battlefield, it required vision, leadership, and difficult decisions at the highest levels. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had been the steady hand guiding America through the storm since before the United States even entered the war. Yet, as 1944 turned into 1945, the strains of leadership began to take a severe toll on his health. Roosevelt, who had battled polio decades earlier and managed a demanding political career despite his physical challenges, was now visibly weakened. Still, his resolve never faltered. Even as his body grew frailer, his mind remained sharp, and his commitment to seeing the war through to victory was unshakable. In the months leading to his death in April 1945, Roosevelt was deeply involved in shaping both the military strategy to end the war and the post-war global order. At key Allied conferences, such as Yalta, he negotiated with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin to plan the final assaults and the world that would emerge after the Axis powers' defeat. These meetings were crucial in laying the groundwork for the United Nations and the geopolitical landscape that would dominate the second half of the 20th century. Meanwhile, the battles in the Pacific continued with relentless intensity. The capture of Okinawa in June 1945 marked the bloodiest campaign yet, with thousands of lives lost and fierce resistance from Japanese forces, including waves of desperate kamikaze attacks targeting Allied ships. This battle foreshadowed the immense cost that an invasion of the Japanese home islands would exact, terrifying military planners and civilian leaders alike. Faced with the prospect of a prolonged, costly invasion, the United States turned to a new, devastating technology: the atomic bomb. Developed in secret under the Manhattan Project, this weapon represented a terrifying leap in destructive power. The decision to use it was not taken lightly. Debates within the U.S. government weighed the potential to save lives by ending the war swiftly against the ethical and humanitarian consequences of unleashing such devastation. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, instantly killing tens of thousands and obliterating much of the city. Just 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The scale of destruction and loss of life shocked the world and demonstrated the horrifying potential of nuclear warfare. The bombings brought Japan to the brink of surrender. Emperor Hirohito, breaking a long-held tradition of imperial silence, addressed his people to announce the decision to capitulate on August 15, 1945. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2 aboard the USS Missouri, officially ending World War II. The conclusion of the war marked the beginning of a new era. Roosevelt, who had not lived to see the final victory, left behind a legacy of determined leadership through one of the darkest chapters in history. His vision shaped the Allied coalition and the plans for post-war reconstruction and peace. The use of atomic weapons introduced the world to a new and terrifying dimension of warfare, one that would influence international relations and military strategy for decades to come. Meanwhile, the human cost of the Pacific campaign, millions dead, countless wounded, and cities devastated, reminded the world of war's brutal reality. As the globe began to rebuild, the United States emerged as a superpower, its economy and military unmatched. The sacrifices made during the war forged a national identity centered around resilience, innovation, and leadership on the world stage. In the end, the story of America's role in World War II is one of transformation from reluctant isolation to global leadership, from a peacetime nation to a war machine capable of defeating one of history's most determined foes. Roosevelt's unwavering determination, the courage of millions of soldiers, and the relentless industrial might of the nation combined to bring about a victory that changed the course of history forever.